we'll get started today. Hi everyone, hope you guys have been enjoying your day. My name is Cazares. I do attend UCR here. I'm currently a fourth year chemical engineering student. And what I'm going to be talking to you guys today is something that a lot of people maybe not always tie together on the surface, but I'm going to be tying together the parallels and perspectives between music and engineering and how they can actually complement each other rather than clash with each other like many may think. And just to give a little background on who I am, or where I'm coming from, I started playing music at the age of 10 years old. I first started playing in band, playing clarinet in 5th grade, and I've been playing music since then. So that kind of was my start of playing and getting into music, And then as I got older, I eventually got into marching band as well and continued playing the clarinet through there. And I started playing guitar as well as I got into high school. And when I really started getting into music was when I took a music theory class at the age of 17, my junior year of high school. I took an AP music theory. And I really liked that class because it kind of opened my eyes to a new side of music in terms of the class was really focused more on the analytical side of music. And then I started realizing there how there's actually a really mathematical way of thinking about music. And I really liked that because I was actually, I was always really good at math too, and I really liked it as well. And I always really liked physics too. So when I saw that there's similar ways in thinking of both and that you can actually analytically describe music, I thought that was really cool. So that's when I really started delving even more into music. And it was actually at that point that I decided for sure, like, hey, I'm going to be a music major. Like, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. Like, it was my passion. Like, it's really something that I always wanted to do. But, life happens, things change. And during high school, I ended up changing my choice of wanting to major in music. And unfortunately, I allowed myself to be discouraged and thought, maybe it's still a little too difficult. Maybe it's not the most practical choice for me, for my future, It's really hard to be a music major for some may argue. But, I ended up changing my choice of major during high school and ended up wanting to be an engineer instead. Because like I said earlier, I really like calculus and I really like physics too. And I like the problem solving and the creativity aspect behind it. So, that's when I decided to change my major choice and then go into engineering instead, which is a pretty big change. So, with that change being made, I attended here at UCR and started attending the Lawrence College of Engineering. And not going to lie, the shift was really big for me. Going from having music as my passion to going, just full-on engineering student was a really big change for me. And it was a lot to get used to. And I really struggled my first 2 years. And not only that, but it was hard for me to be able to consider the thought of having to give up music for the sake of, having to go fully into engineering, even though I did like it. It was pretty hard for me still. And it was a really hard adjustment. But nonetheless, I did get into engineering still. I started working in a research lab at CSER. I started getting more into it. I started finding my passions and interests within chemical engineering still. And, it did end up working out, but it wasn't until later down the road that I realized that I can still keep both of these in my life, that it doesn't have to be just one or the other, that everyone can have multiple aspects of themselves that all are important to them and that they're all passionate about, whether they seem unrelated, but, they make you who you are. And, to me, music and engineering make me who I am. And has everyone seen Inside Out? Show of hands. Most people? All right. So, how, in the movie, everyone has, their islands that, describe themselves of who they are personality-wise. And, for me, I discovered later on that my two islands are always going to be, music and engineering. And, those are going to be two islands and that, I don't have to necessarily give up one or the other. But, I'm able to keep both. And that, thinking about this over the years, it led me to think, do they really clash as much as we think? Or maybe they can complement each other? And with that, I'm going to why this is really significant and why music and engineering has had such an impact not only individually, but as a whole together. Because I feel like they really do complement each other, and the more I got into each, I realized how the way of the thinking from an engineer can really complement the way of thinking as a musician. And then, the creative way of thinking from a musician can really complement you and your skills of becoming a better engineer. So before I really go into the parallels, I want to really just go on the basics of defining what exactly is music in the first place. And if I can get a volunteer, can anyone tell me what the definition of music is? Very close. Technically, yeah, it is just sound. But yeah, the definition of music can really be simplified to two words. Literally, it's just organized sound. Not necessarily just sound on its own, but just sound being organized in whatever way possible that may be pleasing to the ear or whatnot. And with that being said, with that definition, a lot of people see music as a really abstract thing, right? They see it as something abstract that reflects emotion and color. But, there is an analytical side to it too. And before we get into that, it is interesting to know everything else that music is a reflection of. Because music is a reflection of not only emotion, it's a reflection of our history, of where we have come from. Music can say a lot of where we have come from as cultures. And it says it's a reflection of culture in itself today and present day as well. And given that we're such a globalized society now, the music that you hear in certain regions of the world alone can really tell you a lot about, that culture and that people. And then aside from that, going even more into specifics, it can tell you a lot about those values of those people. And, given the context, music does have a lot of significance in that sense, that it's a reflection of all these things and essentially makes us who we are. But something else interesting is that music is also a reflection of the analytical. It's a reflection of intervals. It can be broken down to derivations, and it could be broken down to sheer numbers. And this is something that is commonly only affiliated with physics, math, and engineering. But what I didn't know up until I took music theory is that you can break down music to the bare minimum and be able to analyze it analytically using these same concepts that we use in engineering. So before we go into the more analytical aspects of the parallels between music and engineering, I want to briefly go back to the cultural aspects in terms of how music and engineering are both reflections of culture, in the sense that, for example, these pieces of architecture right here, we have the Mayan pyramids, we have La Sagrada Familia, and then we have Walt Disney Concert Hall. And in my opinion, these are very significant reflections of culture for both for engineering, because, the engineering in these really reflect their culture in the sense that, for example, the Mayan pyramids, going to be able to organize their agricultural harvest year, they were actually able to model the pyramid where there's 91 steps on each side, and then it adds up to 365 steps total when you add up all the sides. And they did that to be able to account for the year. And it's interesting how they were able to do that such a long time ago. And they really were able to make their pieces of architecture and engineering a reflection of themselves as well. And that goes for the La Sagrada Familia as well. The designer, Antonio Gaudi, I had the privilege of seeing this myself last year in Spain. And it was really cool because you realize that the guy who designed it, literally the whole thing, he designed from inspiration from nature. So every aspect of this cathedral is designed from influence of what meant the most to him. And that was aspects of nature, and that was stories from the Bible that he incorporated all around. And so, you can see the influence within the church of how he uses the pillars inside to resemble trees and leaves on the roof and, just stuff like that. So, it shows that both engineering and music can both be a really strong reflection of culture, and how engineering in itself can be an art form and vice versa. And going more into the analytical parallels between the two, another parallel is in reference to building blocks. So as most of us already know, for math, the building blocks are just sheer numbers on their own. For chemistry, we have the periodic table of elements that has a finite number of elements that pretty much describe all the surroundings that we know and are around us all the time. And the same actually goes for music as well. Music only has 12 notes, which are described by circle of fifths here, which I'll describe a little bit more into depth later on. But essentially, it's kind of crazy to think that literally every song that you've ever heard on the radio or on your iPod or wherever, all of it can be described with only 12 notes. And from those 12 notes, everything that you've ever heard is just built off of that. So in that way, it's very similar to chemistry and math in the sense that of using those finite number of units to be able to build something much greater using those simple tools. And to be able to build off of that more, this is significant because In the same way that they have those fundamental finite number of units that are used to build something much greater, it goes to the saying that it's very common, I'm sure you guys have heard already. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And that definitely goes for both music, chemistry, and math. An atom on its own, such as a carbon atom or a hydrogen atom, it's not really significant, at least in most aspects. It can't really do too much on its own. But it's really when you start to connect them together in a very particular way, such as the caffeine molecule I have posted up here, that it starts to become something more significant, and it starts to play a bigger role in determining us of how we feel a certain way and how we react to it. And the same goes for music too. One single note by itself is not really going to do too much in terms of the experience of the listener. So if I were to play for you, that's not really, it doesn't really hold too much on its own, it doesn't really stand too strong. But once I start building what's the equivalent of, say, a molecule or a family of notes, which is the equivalent pretty much, once I get into when you start combining these notes and connecting them in a certain way, you get something more significant and something that you could build off of to eventually build that song. And 2 examples I already gave is, for example, the molecule of caffeine, and then I put the sheet music to Jingle Bells in here. And what I'm trying to get out of this is that it's kind of interesting because, if you're like, for example, walking with your friend in the morning and, you're drinking a cup of coffee, you really love that cup of coffee, no one ever is usually going to say, oh, I love the taste of carbon, nitrogen, and hydrogen in my cup of coffee every day. Like, I love the way those 2 rings connect together, and that's why it tastes the way it does. Like, it's just freaking awesome. Like, no one's ever going to say that, obviously. You love coffee because it tastes good. It gives you that good experience, and you keep on drinking it because it makes you feel good, and it tastes good. Same with Jingle Bells. Now, a lot of this terminology I'm not going to be able to have time to explain it today, what I'm going to use, but, for example, Jingle Bells, holiday season comes around, everyone likes to listen to music that makes you feel happy, jolly. But when you're listening to maybe Jingle Bells with your friend in the car or something, when in terms of explaining why you like the song, you're never going to say, oh, I love the sound of Jingle Bells because I love how it uses a G major scale. I love how it starts in the 5th degree of the song, and then it jumps up through a 6 major interval up to B, and then it goes descending back to the 5th. Oh man, I think that's just awesome. It's like, no, for the same reason that you like coffee, you like Jingle Bells because of the way it makes you feel. But the artist writing out Jingle Bells used that specifically. He used this combination of notes specifically because he knows it's going to make you feel happy. He knows that it's going to reach its purpose and effect, just like the way the chemist designs that molecule to be able to achieve its full effect in giving you a pleasant taste and a pleasant feeling. Same as Jingle Bells. And with this, we go more into a little depth on how derivations actually play into music, which is really interesting because, when you hear the word derivative or derivation, most people don't think of music. You think of calculus, you think of physics, because derivations are a very powerful tool in both of those, right? For example, in physics, F equals ma. F equals ma. So, it's a very powerful yet simple formula that's used in a lot of physics to be able to describe the motion that occurs all around us. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to go more into depth on it now. Essentially, there's something very similar or equivalent in music, which is called the certain ways to describe. But to basically sum it up, it's kind of like a roadmap that describes all the sounds that we use and kind of makes sense to how all songs are constructed in a certain way. And with that being said, it's kind of crazy to think that, as I said earlier, with 12 notes being available to us to be able to construct literally every song that we've heard with just those 12 notes, that we're able to just make sense of every song that we've ever heard with just a chart as simple as this. And to go more into depth on how a derivation can play into music, essentially, one of the more common scales that pretty much almost literally every song that you've ever heard is built off of is called the major scale. So it might sound familiar, right? I'm sure some of you guys have already heard that sound, or maybe you've heard it in the past before. And pretty much that scale is used to build off every song. And what's interesting is that from that one scale, every other sound in music that we hear can be derived from those same 7 notes. So with that, we can also get this. Sounds a little different, right? You can even describe it quantitatively of how the second one sounds a little sadder, sounds a little darker, sounds a little heavier, while the other one sounded more uplifting, and it sounded brighter, and it sounded happier. And while those two scales really give different sides of emotion, in reality, it's actually the same exact number of notes, just starting at a different point. So it's like if I was to give you the set of numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, but instead I gave you 3, 4, 2, 1. It's the same exact set of numbers, right? But it's just starting at a different point, and it is fundamentally different, just like with the scales I played you guys. They're the same exact notes what I just played, just starting at a different point, and just that simple shift can really change the emotional effect and the experience of the listener in that sense. And with going more to depth on that, who's heard of an isomer? Or hands? So, okay, so we got a few people that know what isomer is. Essentially, to go over this, an isomer is the same chemical formula, right? So, same molecule, well, not necessarily the same molecule, but same atoms that are being incorporated into it, but it's a different shape or different form of connectivity between those atoms. And this is something really powerful because on paper, when you're looking at the atoms that do make up that molecule, with 2 isomers, for example, they could be mirror images. On paper, you see that they're the same exact atoms that build up each of those molecules, but the way they're connected is really different, or slightly different, maybe just one slight change. And that one slight change can completely change the effect that chemical has on you. So, I think I've heard an example from my OChem professor in the past that said that, an isomer of one molecule can serve as a cure to your illness, it can serve as a medicine, while the isomer of that molecule can potentially be poisonous to you. It's something as simple as that, just being 2 mirror images that can lead to a molecule either helping you out or, leaving an effect that is undesired. And there's actually something really similar in music too. And the equivalent in music to an isomer is called an inversion. And essentially it's the same thing. What's interesting about inversion is that it uses the same exact notes, but just played in a different order. So, and again, the reason that these different inversions are used are to be able to produce different effects on the listener's ear, to be able to provoke different emotions. So, for example, I can play a C major chord down here, when in reality it's actually the same exact notes I'm playing up here with this inversion. And it sounds slightly different, right? But in reality it's the same exact notes being played for both of them. And the reason why that's significant in music is that, for songwriting, you want to be able to formulate the notes in a way that are close together when you're changing the notes. So that's going to sound a lot better, or makes more sense than it's just more practical, and you can hear the first one that it flows a little bit better, and it just makes more sense, and it's more pleasing to the ears of the listener and being able to experience those shifts in the notes. And then another reason why the derivations are significant in the sense that, one slight change in the atom of a molecule can completely change its purpose, right? And the effect it leaves on its environment or the person around it. And the same goes for music too. With that family of notes that's getting grouped together, one small note that's changed can completely change the emotion and the emotional effect that is left on that person or the experience of the listener in general. So, for example, I could play. But then this this leaves a very different effect as opposed to if I'm playing. So, they sound pretty different emotionally, and they leave kind of a different effect on the listener. The first one is, you could say, is a little more more uplifting. You probably heard it before. It's a really common use of progression. It kind of makes you feel happy. It's uplifting. While the other one is a little bit more darker, heavier, and it may sound a little bit more sad or ominous even. And that change is able to be achieved by just changing one note on the chord. And with just that one simple change in the note, changes the effect completely, just as with the molecule or formula. One little change in it can completely change its purpose and the effect that it has. Alright, so, I wasn't able to get to all the parallels that I've been able to pinpoint in music today, but, those are some of the bigger ones that I wanted to go over. And, at this point, while it may seem kind of interesting, maybe not, I don't know, of why, of how those parallels exist between music and engineering, at the end of the day, it just makes you question, why does it matter? How can this be of use to us, really, in reality, of exploring these similarities between music and engineering? And in my experience, with being able to go into both music and engineering, and really having a passion and delving into both and maintaining them both in my life, I have realized that, it's not even just a matter of looking for parallels and similarities between stuff such as music and engineering. I want this to be able to inspire you guys to be able to go out into your lives and look at similarities and parallels between aspects in your own lives of what matters most to you. Because I feel like with exploring parallels between things that seem so different, such as music and engineering, that once we find the overlap between those things that seem to collide and clash together, when in reality they hold more overlap than we think, we could start to kind of hold new perspectives on how to go about exploring what's not known or what is new to us. And in my opinion, this can really help us achieve a lot, because this does not only apply to different things in our life, but it can apply to people as well. That with this in mind, we can try to look for the parallels and overlap between us as people in general, and instead of overlooking all the differences that exist between us and seemingly look at the surface and say my way of thinking is too different from theirs, we can really start to see the similarities that exist. And with maybe trying to see the similarities and the parallel between different things as opposed to how they clash, it may be possible for humanity to be able to move a little closer to get to where we're trying to go and be able to solve many of the issues that we see.